Fusion. Welcome to week 3 of our Easter series. I'm so excited to have Sydney here. She was in front, behind the camera, and now she's in front of the camera, and she has done this amazing mural. Honestly, she only painted it so we could film at home and it looked good. No, she really wanted to do a mural for the house. But we're excited to do week 3 of this Easter series, and we're going to continue on with this song that we did last week called Graves into Gardens. And I hope it speaks to you the same way it has spoken to me in this time, especially the line where it talks about turning graves into gardens, turning our utmost deadness and turning it into life. And that's what Christ has done for us in this season. So let this song speak to you. I've searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. Every desire's now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Would you see them all? You still call me friend, 'cause the God of the mountain is the God valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace will find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. We'll sing this bridge out. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. Turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. God, we hope in this time that you would speak to us, that you would give us comfort, and you would give us peace. And I pray that you would use this time to speak to our minds and to our hearts. God, give us a glimpse of you in this time. Amen. Fusion, I'm happy to be with you on this last week of our Easter series, and I hope that each of these sermons for me have been really powerful to look at, to write, to interact with, and I hope they're powerful for you in this time. So Easter is done, and I'm sure if this was a normal time, that most of us, if you're like my wife, would be heading out to the store right now to get that Easter Peep half-price extravaganza. I, on the other hand, would not. But the other thing that she really likes is she likes to come home, open the pack, and not eat them. No. She wants to leave them for a week till they get a little bit crusty, right? They get a little bit hard or something. She likes old Peeps. I don't know what to tell you. And I would venture to think that sometimes she feels alone in that. There's not a lot of people who share that thought process with her, and sometimes she does feel kind of alone in that. So there was a time when I was a kid, my best friend of the entire world, his name's Philip, he lived 5 houses up the street from me. And we were best friends, we did everything. His brothers and sisters were like my brothers and sisters. His parents were like my second parents, and his dad taught me how to play basketball. And so we're in middle school together, and we've been friends now since we were like 5 or 4 years old, something like that. And we're about to go into 8th grade year, which is, for all you 8th graders out there, that's like the year that you get to rule the school, and you're the top dog, and everything's feeling good. And as we're heading into the summer, school has just ended, Philip has to come tell me and drop the news like, hey, we're moving to Columbia, we're moving, my mom is going to school. And I was devastated. I, in this moment, was feeling alone. And I didn't know what to do. He said, you can come visit, I'll come visit, but it was really tough, and I just really I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, I was younger and was able to adapt to the change a little bit quicker, but there was a definite feeling of loneliness there for a while. And that wasn't the only time that I've ever felt lonely. Whether I was on my own making certain decisions, standing by certain beliefs, or dealing with doubts and fears, I have felt alone through many different times of my life. I definitely had seasons of feeling alone. You guys know my story and my struggle with depression. I went through seasons when I was in college where I just felt so alone. At this point in your life, I'm sure you have felt alone at times too. Maybe it was because your family moved, or your friend group changed, or there was a breakup, certain decisions that no one else seemed to understand, or maybe you had a question or a feeling or a doubt that made you kind of feel alienated from the people around you. I think we all know what it feels like to be on our own. And this is different than experiencing independence or freedom, right? Like this on our own is more of like loneliness or fear or uncertainty and sort of this anxiety all wrapped up into one. And when we feel like we are on our own, we start to believe things that seem true in the moment, but generally aren't true. Maybe we think that nobody understands us and probably never will. Or that we'll never get through what we're facing. Or that we don't have enough strength to get through the day. Or maybe we become more afraid and our isolation, it just intensifies in this time. And here's what's so troubling about loneliness. Statistically speaking, almost half of Americans feel alone. Now I have to admit, sometimes being alone is cool, right? Like there's some people that my wife is an introvert and she can spend long periods of time on her own and actually enjoy it. I, on the other hand, am an extrovert and I need to be around people. Thus my quarantine is kind of just making me go crazy. But there's a difference between being alone and feeling alone, right? There's a difference between being alone and feeling alone. And then there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And when it comes to loneliness, our generation is flooded with it. And that sense of loneliness has contributed to a rise in things like anxiety and self-harm and depression and even suicide in our culture. Why? Because loneliness tends to make us feel hopeless. Think about it. When we feel alone, we tend to feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by our situations, our circumstances, our feelings, our pain, and our confusion. And here's what's crazy about that. Loneliness feels so bad to us because God wired us that way. Now, I'm not saying God wanted us to feel depressed or sad, but I am saying we were created and wired for close relationships. I'm going to say that again. We were created and we were wired for close relationships. You and I were never meant to carry the weight of what we feel, experience, and go through and worry about on our own. And so it makes sense to us that when we don't have that, when we don't have those people we were created to be around, things just don't feel right to us. But what do you do about it? Sure, showing up for friends is important. Joining a small group is important, but there are times when being alone and even feeling alone is just an unavoidable part of life, like right now. So how do we handle it? How do we handle it? Well, believe it or not, what happened that very first Easter and the days following can be a game changer for us when it comes to seemingly this overwhelming problem. The very first Easter left Jesus' closest friends feeling overwhelmed in a similar way. For years, they had been traveling together, doing life together, hanging out with Jesus every other day. And suddenly, now they were on their own. At least that's what they thought for a couple of days between Jesus' death and his resurrection. While we don't spend a lot of time at Easter thinking about the time between Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, I can guarantee you that his closest friends, disciples, and followers never forgot how difficult those 3 days were. You see, Jesus' closest friends and followers had walked away from jobs and family members, finances and safety just to follow him. And then he died. The future they imagined for their leader, their country, and themselves disappeared in an instant. And just like that, everything changed. So what did they do? So we know that some stuck together, but many of them ran for their lives or even hid from the people who killed Jesus. And they had no clue. They had no clue what was going to happen next. We know how the story ends, but at that time they didn't. So imagine their surprise and relief at seeing Jesus alive again. Yes, you heard me right. Jesus died, came back to life, and then left again. But this time their response was completely different. Here's how I know. And if you hear this noise right now, here are the things about filming at home. That's our dog Rooney, who is drinking water right now. But this is what happens when we're in these times. But let's get back to this. We know that Jesus died and he came back to life and he left again. One of the ways we know what happened to Jesus is a document written down by a doctor named Luke who investigated this whole thing. Luke investigated all that had happened to Jesus. You may have heard this document called the Book of Luke. Well, that's not the only thing Luke wrote, in fact. There's a second document where Luke recorded exactly what happened to Jesus after the Jesus followers after Jesus died and came back to life. He recorded their acts, and so we call that book the Book of Acts. According to Luke, when Jesus left a second time, right, because we said he died, he rose again, he came to his disciples, and then he left again. But when Jesus left a second time, his followers didn't seem to think that they had been left alone again. In fact, it wasn't until after Jesus left a second time that Christianity really took off and began to change human history forever. And it seems Jesus made it that way on purpose. And we'll get to the rest of what Luke said, but before we do, I want to look at another document written by one of Jesus' good friends, John. John remembers that before Jesus was crucified, he told his disciples that he was going to go away. But they didn't get it at that time, right? Much like when your small group leaders tell you something and you don't get it until much later on. This is what they said. Here's what Jesus said in his final meal with his disciples before he was arrested. This is in John 16, verse 7. It says, "But in fact, it is best for you that I go away." Jesus actually told his disciples that it would be better for them if he left. But why? Well, we find out as Jesus continues here in the rest of verse 7. It says, "Because if I don't, the advocate won't come. If I do go away, then I will send him to you." Jesus said that in order for the advocate to come, he had to go away. The term advocate usually refers to someone who helps, comforts, and defends other people. And the same is true here. This advocate that Jesus is referring to is what we call the Holy Spirit. It's basically the Spirit of Jesus among us, even though he's not physically present. He is the one who helps us, comforts us, and gives us wisdom and power beyond ourselves. The Holy Spirit came to earth after Jesus left the earth. Jesus promised that if he left, it would be better for us. Why? Because the Holy Spirit would be here. And once the Holy Spirit arrived, the power and the Spirit of Jesus could be everywhere, not just in Jesus. And so, right before Jesus ascends into heaven and leaves for the second time, he reminds his disciples of what he said at that last meal together before he was killed. Yes, his physical body was leaving, but his Holy Spirit would remain behind. And check this out. This is in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. It says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. And you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Of all the things Jesus could have reminded of his disciples, he chose to remind them that the Holy Spirit was on the way. The Holy Spirit would come and give them the power to tell people all over the world about him. In other words, it was a reminder that even though he was leaving, they wouldn't be alone. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. In the days and the years to come, Jesus' followers would receive the power of the Holy Spirit to tell other people all over the world about him. And today, roughly 1/3 of the earth's population says that they believe that message. The Christian movement, started by Jesus and carried on by his first disciples, outlasted things like the Roman Empire, intense persecution from governments and other religions, and thousands of years of change. The men and women who left twice started the men and women who Jesus left twice started the greatest movement in human history. Even when their leaders seemingly left, even when their overwhelming lack of resources, even with their perceived powerlessness in the face of that time, the Holy Spirit gave them power even though they seemed powerless. And even though Jesus left, he sent the Holy Spirit to be with them. And that meant that even though Jesus wasn't physically there, that they would never be alone. Here's the best part about all this. Jesus' promise was not just for those disciples. When Jesus promised the advocate who would give us power and be with us, that was true for everyone who would believe in him. This means that you and I have access to that very advocate. So I want us to do just sort of a thought process right now, just sort of a mind exercise. If I asked you guys to get in your car, even if you can't drive, if I asked you to get in your car and drive to the church, many of you probably could do that. Many of you would probably be able to get in your car and be able to drive to the church and get there safely and get there soundly. Now, imagine I asked you to drive, and you could get there probably without any help. Now, imagine if I asked you to drive to the Panthers Stadium. You would probably say, okay, I need to put it in my GPS. But what if I said you couldn't have a GPS, you just had to get there? Some of you might be able to do it. You might be able to look at signs and kind of know a general sense of where you're going. But getting from place to place in our time is so much better with Google Maps, with the GPS to help us get there. And this is much like what the Holy Spirit can do for us. It can guide us when we don't know the way in front of us. You see, Easter is so much bigger than a celebration of something that happened 2,000 years ago. Yes, Jesus' resurrection changed everything, and the resurrection is the center of everything we believe as Christians. But it's also a reminder of his power and his presence that are still available to us today. Easter can change everything about how we live our lives right now because of this simple truth. Guys, I want you to hear this. Easter means you are never alone. Easter means you are never alone. Jesus' first followers knew what it was like to feel like they were on their own. They knew what it was like to feel crushed. They even knew what it felt like to feel like it was a huge mistake to follow him, right? When he died and didn't immediately rise, or even when just the fact that he was killed and he didn't defend himself, they felt crushed. And while I can imagine they loved seeing him come back to life, they were probably surprised that he didn't stay with them. They probably wondered how Jesus not being physically with them could actually be a good thing. But soon they learned that it was. He left them something behind. Actually, he left someone behind, an advocate, his Spirit, which reminded them that they would never be alone. What if you and I could live in the same assurance and confidence as that they did after receiving the Holy Spirit? What if no matter how lonely, overwhelmed, or misunderstood we felt, we could trust that we are never alone? Let me ask it more directly. What if this is real? What if the literal, actual God who created everything and died and rose again is literally always with you? What if the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, is very real, very here, and wants to help you with whatever you are facing today? See, simply trusting that the Holy Spirit is with us can change everything for us. In fact, even though we can't see him and may not always feel like he's there, knowing he is with us in the moments that we feel on our own means that we can be confident of a couple of things. So here's the thing, we can be confident of a couple of things knowing that Jesus is with us. Here's the first thing we can be confident of. You can talk to him at any time, any place, for any reason. When you feel alone, what if you chose to talk to God about what you're going through? In the New Testament, we learned that the Holy Spirit helps us talk to God. Even when we don't have the words to say, he talks for us. What if the next time you were feeling alone, you chose to talk to God about what you were facing and feeling? Here's the second thing that we know. You're stronger than you think you are. You are stronger than you think you are. The odds were stacked against Jesus' first followers. Jesus wasn't there. They were underqualified. The Romans were incredibly powerful. Yet the movement they carried has forever changed the world. That's because they knew they were stronger than they seemed. They even knew what it looked like that they were on their own. They had God's power flowing in and through their lives. The same is true for you and I. When we face challenges that seem too overwhelming for us, we can be confident that the Holy Spirit's power is in us and it cannot be overcome. His power cannot be overcome. We can also be confident that God's power in other believers is there to support us as well. You might feel that what you're facing is too powerful for you, and that may be true, but is not too powerful for the one who has sent the advocate for you and I. Remember, Easter means you are never alone. The power of Easter is that Jesus enabled us to be confident that we'll never be alone again. Why? Because we trust in his Spirit. We trust in his Spirit. As you heard today, I want you to think about this question. In what area of your life do you feel alone? In what area of your life do you feel alone? Then imagine Jesus, the same Jesus who loved you and who died for you, looking you in the eyes and saying this: you are not on your own here. We are in this together. Imagine that. Imagine him saying, hey, Sydney, you're not alone. We're in this together. Hey, Daniel, you're not alone. We're in this together. Hey, Kate, you're not alone. We're in this together. Hey, Palmer, you're not alone. We're in this together. Maybe the best news you will hear this week is you don't have to imagine this. The Holy Spirit can make this a reality. And that is why Easter is so very happy. Happy Easter, guys. We're going to go into a time of worship now. Fusion, I hope that sermon spoke to you as it spoke to me about what it means to be alone and that we are not alone. We're going to sing the song Peace by Hillsong Young and Free.
You will stay true even when the lies come. understanding. May it ever set my heart at ease. And anxiety come, I remember that peace is a promise you keep. And peace is a promise you keep. You will stay true even in the chaos. Word remains true even when my mind wreaks havoc. I will be still, for I've known all along my Jehovah Shalom. There's a peace far beyond all understanding. May it ever set my heart at ease. And what anxiety fails to remember, this peace is a promise you keep. Peace is a promise you keep. You are peace to the restless soul, and peace when my thoughts rage roll, and peace to the anxious heart. That's who you are, that's who you are. You are peace to the fear takes hold, and peace when I feel enclosed, and peace when I lose control. That's who you are, that's who you are. I found peace far beyond all understanding. Let it flow when my mind's under siege, and all anxiety bows in the presence of Jesus, the keeper of peace. And peace is a promise he keeps.
Fusion, I hope that song was able to speak to you, like I said, as it's been speaking to us in this time. And guys, this is a tough thing to say, but most of you have seen the email that has gone out this weekend that mine and Sydney's time here at University City is going to be coming to a close. And we know that God brought us here for a reason. And we know God is moving here at University City, and He's going to keep moving here at University City, and that God is also, directing our next steps as well. We believe that God has a plan and a purpose for both of us, and we just want you to know that we love each and every one of you, and that we love all of the time we've spent with you, and we love all the care that you've given to us, and how you've loved on us, and how we've been able to serve you, and how we've been able to love on you. And thank you for giving me that privilege of serving you and Sydney, being able to serve you. And so I hope that if you haven't seen the email, that you would go back and watch it, and that you would read the email and watch the video. Just know that we love you, and we can't wait to be able to gather together again soon and be able to see you guys face to face. So I hope you guys have a great Sunday, and just know that we love you. Bye.